The popcorn's been popping for quite some time with this one. Alabama and Florida State set for a showdown in Tally coming up Saturday, 3:30 Eastern. Can the Noles talk the talk and walk the walk, or will the 8th-ranked team in the country run their win streak to 24 when it comes to season openers? Of course, the opening of a season is a chance for Florida State to put that historically bad season a year ago behind them. The worst record by a preseason top 10 team, Florida State 2024, 2-10 after starting the year number 10. We, of course, all remember how things played out for them, only getting those wins over Cal and Charleston Southern. But that's the past. We now look forward to the future and the present and getting ready for what could be a very electric and fun atmosphere Saturday in Tallahassee. Very pleased to continue this conversation and welcome in Mike Rodak of 24/7 Sports covering Bama, and Brendan Sonnone doing the same thing for Florida State, also over at 24/7 Sports. And I want to start with you, Brendan, here, because you look at Tallahassee ready to welcome in Bama, newly renovated Doak Campbell Stadium, all the emotions and the feels of how last year went. When you think about all that in mind, emotionally, what is at stake for this game right here tomorrow?
So part of the answer is going to be it's impossible to know for sure because we don't really know how this new group's going to respond to adversity, to positive things that happen in the game. There's 50 plus new players on the roster right now. You have a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator. So how all these things gel together is super interesting to me. And now Mike Norvell did really emphasize a level of baseline experience for who we brought in the transfer portal, wanting guys who were kind of self-made, a lot of them lower-ranked recruits who kind of had to work their way up. That's something that I think was a correction from last year. But the dynamic that's going to be super interesting is like what happens if Florida State loses big to Alabama? Like, how does that linger? Is there remnants like from last season? Or if you play really well, we saw in 2021 Florida State nearly upset Notre Dame in a similar type of environment and prove it type of season, and then came out the next week and lost to Jacksonville State. So it's like that's going to be this thing that we really don't know, but it's going to be, this game has the potential to be a tone setter for the rest of the season and perhaps beyond in a pretty major game for Mike Norvell in his tenure.
Yeah, Mike, we look over to Bama and you see, okay, year 2 for Kalen DeBoer, coming off what can be called a disappointing 9-4 season. So as you retool, you feel good about the prospects of being the 8th-ranked team in the country to start the year. When you look at it from a perspective of the Crimson Tide, what's at stake for them? Do you need to blow out Florida State to let folks know, hey, we are here for real this year?
Yeah, I think a comfortable win will certainly help, but the last time we saw this Alabama team, they really should have won comfortably. That was the ReliaQuest Bowl down in Tampa. Michigan was without a bunch of its best players. Alabama had all of its best players, and Alabama still lost. It was a pretty rough showing the last time that we saw Alabama on the field. And about a week after that, their strength coach began the offseason program by saying, if you don't want to be here, then leave. And so there's really been a sense of kind of tightening up things around the program this offseason. Obviously, last year was a pretty big transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer. They're basically trying to keep players in the building, keep them from leaving. And they went through this spring portal period without a single player leaving. And that's been something that has been cited by a lot of players and coaches. And they feel like everybody's on board right now. Everybody's kind of pulling in the right direction. And this is a team that wants to be more disciplined, more consistent than what we saw last year. And obviously, this is a pretty big opportunity for them to show it. Conversely, though, it's another chance for them, if they don't have a great game, for a lot of questions to arise about Kalen DeBoer as he goes into his second year.
Yeah, Mike, I want to continue with the thought of Bama and go to the injury front. We know Jan Miller and probably going to be out for a little bit of time. In total, when you look at the way they're feeling, how was the health looking in the injury report for the Crimson Tide right now?
Yeah, a couple big losses that they've taken here the last few weeks. Jan Miller, the starting running back, went down with a dislocated collarbone, so he's probably out probably until the Georgia game at the end of September. And then Tim Keenan was the big one this week in practice. If you picked a player on this roster that is almost irreplaceable, that's pretty high on that list, I think Tim Keenan's right up there. The redshirt senior, 315-pound guy, they don't have a player quite like him, and he's a second-team All-American, a pretty important player to plug the middle of the field, and the depth behind him is not great. It's very inexperienced. It's most likely a player, a redshirt freshman, and Jeremiah Beeman, who will be starting in his place on Saturday. And when you look at an Alabama team that took some hits on the road last year against some quarterbacks who could run, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, Diego Pavia at Vandy, it would concern me a little bit not having Tim Keenan against a quarterback and Tommy Castellanos who can run, especially on the road here.
And then from Florida State's perspective, I would say they've had a lot more injury luck so far than Alabama has comparatively. They have a couple of two deep guys who are not expected to play. One is a wide receiver, Lewayne McCoy, would have been kind of vying for a potential starting spot, or at least your fourth wide receiver. Then Kevin Wynn, a big backup defensive tackle, true freshman. But other than that, I think they're pretty good. Squirrel White was a little dinged up, but he's good to go. Jason Jenkins came back from a really big injury in the offseason. Those are two pivotal pieces for you, and they both seem good to go. So, yeah, Florida State's in pretty good shape right now.
Oh, yeah, always nice to be able to start the season and feel like, hey, you have most of your guys there ready and available to play. Brendan, you mentioned this a little bit, alluding to Gus Malzahn, when you mentioned that a new offensive coordinator is there for Florida State. They get him to leave being the head coach at UCF to now run the offense for the Noles. Of course, he has the history with Mike Norvell. With that in mind, given the fact that they know each other, what type of impact do you expect him to have on Florida State and maybe even helping out Coach Norvell?
Yeah, it's super interesting that this dynamic has kind of developed, and there's only been a couple of other examples of it with, like, say, Chip Kelly to Ohio State with a former head coach going to call plays, but this has history to it. Mike Norvell and Gus Malzahn, worked together really early on at Tulsa back, I think, 2007 or so. Now they know each other. Mike Norvell's offense was really much so rooted in what Gus Malzahn did, and changed and adapted a little bit over time. But Gus Malzahn is the play caller. It's his offense. Mike Norvell's been very clear about that throughout the offseason, especially this back half of it. He allows Mike Norvell to do more game management stuff, focus more on maybe coaching up a player in between snaps, going after an official if needed, and being able to stick with that a little bit. We'll see how things happen when, say, fourth down decision, or if you want to adjust tempo. But there is this interesting dynamic of how does that power element work. They say it's going to, but we have to wait and see. That is another fascinating kind of sub wrinkle to this game.
And yeah, Gus Malzahn does have a little bit of a history with Alabama's defensive coordinator, Kane Womack. They go back. In fact, I think he was actually his coach at Arkansas for a little while. And Kane's an Arkansas native. So they know each other pretty well. Kane Womack's dad used to coach in the SEC against Gus Malzahn, ran the same defense that Kane Womack does. So very interesting chess match where I think you have two sides that know each other pretty well. I don't know if that applies as much for players. There's maybe one Alabama player who's around from when Auburn had Gus Malzahn, but I think the big emotional thing for Alabama is Tommy Castellanos. I think that really got under their skin when Castellanos was talking about Alabama without Nick Saban not being able to stop him this summer. And that's something that players at SEC Media Days were peeved about. And even this week, on a completely unrelated question, one of Alabama's defensive starters, LT Overton, just brought up the idea of disrespect will be addressed accordingly. And that was a pretty clear shot at Tommy Castellanos. So I think that one, probably more than Gus Malzahn, is going to be in the minds of Alabama players. But obviously, I don't think Kalen DeBoer wants it to be too big of a deal either for players.
Yeah, the chatter leading up to this one in the offseason really made you, okay, circle. I can't wait till we get to the season starting. And now that it is officially here, we get tomorrow, we get to kick it off. Brendan, I'll go to you first. Who wins this and what's the final score?
I have Alabama winning, I think it was 34-21. So FSU covering. I think they keep it pretty respectable for a good chunk of the game. I do think Alabama's depth in the trenches just wear down and takes the toll on FSU as it goes. But I do expect fight. I do expect explosiveness at times on both sides of the ball. I think it'll be a better product than last year. Granted, it would be hard to be much worse.
And yeah, for Alabama, I have Alabama winning 30-20. I do think Florida State can cover the spread in this game. And keep in mind for Alabama, they have lost 4 out of their last 5 games away from their home stadium, which is very unheard of in recent Alabama history. This is a team that did not play well on the road last year. They did have a couple very good games against LSU and Wisconsin, but they looked awful against Oklahoma. They looked pretty bad against Vanderbilt. They lost to Tennessee on the road. They went down to Michigan in the bowl game and lost. So I would not be looking at this as an automatic win for Alabama, despite what their records were last year. Obviously, weather could play a role in this game as well. If there's a lightning delay or some rain, we saw that in the bowl game against Michigan. We saw that when Alabama went and played South Florida 2 years ago, which, by the way, that was the last time that Ty Simpson played a lot at quarterback, was a weather game. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out, if there is some rain and some sloppiness, but not an automatic win for Alabama by any means.
Yeah, Mike Rodak, Brendan Sonnone, excited to see how this game ends up tomorrow. We'll have our HQ crew there for the college football pregame show. I know it will be a fun and exciting atmosphere. Hopefully you guys will be able to stay dry. Meanwhile, tonight there are more football games to be played. Hop on over to CBS Sports Network to see Charleston State take on Army at 6 Eastern, and then UNLV played week 0. So this is game number 2 for them. They're at Sam Houston State, Dan Mullen and company with a 9:30 start to that one.